I've been wanting to make films for a long time, so I think films have influenced me in different ways at different times as I discovered all these brilliant filmmakers throughout, the past 15 years, ever since I started trying to make films. The Dardenne brothers, I think that was the films that made me connect with my DOP as well. He loved the work of Dardenne brothers, and so we started watching their films, and I think that still influences him a lot and the way that he uses his camera. But then, for example, for this film, I've had other companion pieces as well that were sort of these films that I carried during the journey of making this film, and I think will influence me in the future, but these were very present at this point. And it's Wanda by Barbara Loudon. That was an incredible film, American filmmaker, and it's a film that it's just, as soon as I watched it, I couldn't help but be influenced by it because it's brilliant. I also had Il Posto by Ermanno Olmi. That was a film I discovered not that long ago, and I was amazed that I hadn't seen it before. Beautiful film. And then also, someone told me to watch The Nights of Cabiria by Fellini, and I also couldn't help but think that the character had certain similarities with mine, with Aurora, with that sense of like going from obstacle and keep on going. And visually we also had influences from Chantal Akerman, and there's a lot of like these figures that I feel influenced me at other points. I love cinema. Even like when I was young, one of the very first ones that influenced me was John Cassavetes, which I recently discovered. It's also a filmmaker that can load slubs, which I wasn't expecting. And so his films, they were the very first ones that really expanded the horizon for me on like what cinema could be. And I discovered these films when I was maybe 15, so they're quite formative. It's my first film, so there was a lot of things I had never done before. I think one of the big things, for example, as a writer, I was writing a lot of characters around Aurora, our main character. And I don't think that was something I realized until we did a breakdown of the script, and I realized we needed to cast something like 55 speaking roles. And at that point I thought, okay, I've bitten more than I can chew here. But it was, at the same time, it was an interesting challenge. But I had to learn a lot in the job, and also the film, it follows Aurora and a lot of her routine. I spoke with a lot of people who are pickers, so people who do the job that Aurora does, and I think these conversations influence the film a lot. I think I began talking to pickers because I wanted to obviously understand the routines. So and I wanted to have the film be almost as accurate as possible in terms of what that day is like. But then the conversations were just people were really generous in how much they shared. And I think that began influencing the film a lot. So there was all these different little details that started permeating into the film that I hadn't thought of. And people had these brilliant observations of their day-to-day that I think were quite meaningful, and even, for me it was important to get to know their work, but also what they did outside work. And that was one of the questions I would usually ask, after work, what'd you do? And one of the times I got the answer, I did the laundry. And that to me, and that wasn't a joke. I was like, oh, that's an answer, fair. And that to me, it was so symbolic of, of course, like you're tired. A lot of people reported how the job was not just physically tiring, but also psychologically, mentally, it was really challenging. And so you get home and you don't have enough space, in your life to care for other people and to, have time on your own. You're mainly resting so that the next day you go back and you do the same thing. And we're talking about, 10-hour shifts where you're on your feet, following the instructions of a scanner who has a time code that tells you to the seconds how long you have to collect the next item. And there's very little agency over the work that you do, and the breaks are too short for you to even get to know your colleagues' names. And that to me was, it really shows how alone this job can be, not just physically, but like emotionally as well. It's quite insane that, you might be working full-time and still experiencing poverty, and that is possible today. Because you're right, you're told, if you work, you'll be okay, work will pay. But that's not the truth at all. And I find that, yeah, it's strange because, you know, we make our lives about work. And how come someone can spend their entire weeks working and still not have a comfortable life at the end? I don't think people are demanding a lot. But you're right, exploitation isn't new. I just think now it just comes in other forms, and, you know, businesses are finding other ways of extracting more and more profit from work and from people. And I think that human cost is you can feel that, you know. And yeah, you know, my generation, half of my generation lives paycheck to paycheck. You know, I think we've been, you know, promised progress, and I don't think this is progress. And I don't think it's, you know, we're looking at our lives and we're like, you know, is it going to get better at some point? So I think it's important to look at these themes, and, you know, it makes us also see work and see the way we live with a bit of perspective. And I think sometimes it's something that defines us so much that it's quite hard to have a perspective over it, because, you know, so much of our purpose and meaning is derived from work as well. But to me, it's really important to look, you know, not just obviously at the political issues and, you know, how, you know, a job should pay, you know, but I think also, I also like to think of it more as, you know, do we need to work as much as we're working today? That to me is important too. I think it's good to remind ourselves that for as much as the way that we are living, it's making us feel powerless and isolated. At the end of the day, I really think that, you know, to our core, we really care for each other. And, you know, when things are bad, usually someone is there to try and help you. And I thought that was symbolic to this idea that, you know, if Aurora is lying in the middle of a park, someone will eventually get to her, and it will ask her how she is, and it will try to help her. And that to me is really symbolic of our nature. And I think it's something that is really powerful to remind ourselves of, especially in a system that is trying to put us against each other, and to, you know, believe that we, you know, at our heart, we just care about each other. I don't think that's true at all. I think we want to be part of the collective. Yeah, we long for that. When I was researching these types of jobs, and in particular the job of a picker in the logistics industry, it's an industry that is rife with precarious work, and because of that, a lot of the jobs are done by migrant workers. And of course I couldn't help but immediately think of my own experiences when I moved to Scotland 12 years ago. And I was 18 and I had my first jobs, and, you know, most of the people around me were also migrants, and that to me immediately, you know, I realized, okay, I think this is a story I can tell. And yeah, so I used also definitely a little bit of my own personal experiences to create Aurora. So to cast Aurora, we did a big casting call in Portugal, and we saw something like 500 self-tapes from both actresses and also non-professional actors, so people who had never done acting before. And one of the self-tapes was of Joana Santos. And I think immediately, as soon as I saw her audition tape, I kind of felt she was maybe going to be Aurora. And then we did a few other casting sessions, and I mean, Joana is just incredible. I think she immediately introduced me to an Aurora that I could recognize and that I really wanted to see more. You know, she had this kind of quietness about her, but, you know, she's thinking, and you can kind of hear her thoughts. And that to me it's really hard for me to, you know, get an actress to do that. I think that's something that you either own and you have it, and, you know, you can kind of take charge of. And Joana had that, you know, and she's very different from the main character. They're opposites actually, but she just had like such a compassion towards the character as well, that I thought this is going to be someone that I think I'm really going to enjoy working with. And I think that's why, for example, editing was so joyful, because Joana gave us so many, you know, precious moments for us to work with that made editing, Ella and I, the editor, we really enjoyed the editing process, because Joana gave us so much to work with. Yeah. As soon as I shared the first draft with them, and, you know, I knew they had produced all of Ken Loach's work, and, you know, Ken Loach himself is one of the owners of the production company. Immediately we connected, you know, and we realized how we see the world in a very similar way. And I think with Ken Loach announcing that Old Oak was going to be his last film, I think they were looking for new filmmakers that were still interested in making political films. And so I think as soon as I shared my first draft, we realized, okay, this is a collaboration that needs to happen. And his films come from a tradition of filmmaking that I have a lot of respect for, and that influenced me a lot in understanding how you can tell stories that frame a character within a political context, And I think more and more films are obsessed with, like internal struggles and with thinking about characters as like these isolated beings. And I think there's immense power in framing characters as people who live in a world and that have limited choice to live any other way. And that to me is so important, because at the end of the day, we're maybe not as free as we like to believe we are. And I think it's important to remind ourselves of that, and also to strive for something else, for something better.